The part Sherlock Holmes, and to a lesser extent myself, played in bringing that affair to a successful conclusion. Although Holmes does not agree, it is my belief that Stoker was induced by the unscrupulous Van Helsing deliberately to falsify fact in order to inflate his own reputation as a supernatural detective. What follows, I think, shows that I do not make this charge lightly.
Tell me what you think of this telegram. It arrived this morning.
Would like to consult you regarding lead column in this morning's Daily Graph. Thomas Parker, Whitby, Yorks. Well, have you read the article?
I have. The problem presents one or two more interesting facets. I think we should both profit from learning more of the particulars. Come in.
Mr. Holmes.
That is correct. And you, I take it, are Mr. Thomas Parker of Whitby.
Yes.
Allow me to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson.
How do you do?
How do you do?
Please sit down, Mr. Parker.
Thank you. You've read the item I mentioned in my telegram.
I have indeed.
I am its author.
I'm aware of that.
Oh, indeed, how?
The ink stains on the inside of the index finger and thumb of your right hand told me without you spend much of your time writing. That you are seldom off your feet is borne out of the rundown appearance of your heels. Well, journalism is the only activity I can think of which combines such energy with the more placid activity of putting pen to paper. I thought it likely you were the same journalist who had written the rather interesting account to which you had directed me. But all this is elementary. Pray, tell me, what is on your mind?
Mr. Holmes, I have been authorized by my editor to extend you a fee in return for providing us with a solution to the mystery which took place in Whitby Harbour at midnight last night.
Yes, we can discuss such things as my fee later. Mr. Parker, for the moment I wish to hear a summary of the facts as you know them, in your own words, independent of the restraining hand of your editor.
Very well. Until yesterday evening, the weather in Whitby had been much like that which you are now enjoying in London. Just before midnight, however, the air suddenly became so oppressively still that even the most ignorant of town dwellers would have realized that a storm was approaching. There is a great flat reef in Whitby that has caused the wreck of many a vessel unaware of its presence.
Yes, I know of it.
Well, the Royal Navy has installed a searchlight on top of the East Cliff for the purpose of guiding craft through the narrow alley which is the only safe passage from the open sea into the dock area. Last night, I was assigned by my editor to accompany the workers who were to put the light into operating order and report on the project's work. I arrived at midnight, and as I did so, the storm struck. The wind howled and rain lashed the cliff. The workers had all they could do to hold their footing as they swung the searchlight into position, and a great sigh went up as the light was lit and its beam shone out across the rain and darkness. When we saw what the beam revealed, however, that sigh was strangled in our throats. In the circle of light, a foreign schooner with all its sails set was racing towards the reef.
Foreign, you say? What were her colors?
She flew none, but her hull was unmistakably Russian in design.
I see. Go on.
We braced ourselves for the crash we believed inevitable, and then a curious thing happened.
Yes.
Just when all seemed lost, the wind, which had been waging in an easterly direction, suddenly shifted to the northeast, and the schooner glided smoothly and easily into the harbour. This was so unlike the disaster we had been expecting, the abrupt change of wind, such an unheard-of occurrence that I doubt any of us believed what our eyes told us. Well, I hope I'm not boring you with these details, Mr. Holmes, but I am trying to impress on you what it was like to have witnessed the event.
On the contrary, it is a lucid and informative account. What happened then?
Our feelings of joy were premature. As the schooner slid past, our searchlight fell upon the most horrendous sight, that of a corpse lashed to the helm.
Good heavens.
We were all so shocked that the men forgot to swing the light and the vessel slid from view. But by the time they had recovered enough to act, there was a wrenching sound followed by a crash, and the schooner had run aground on the sand near Tane Hill Pier. There is one more incident to tell you, although I doubt it is of much use.
Every scrap of information is of use at this point, Mr. Parker.
Well, no sooner had the light been trained back on the deck of the ship than something that looked like an immense dog looked up from below and bounded off into the darkness.
A dog?
Yes, I assumed it was a pet of one of the crew. But you may have some other theory.
As I have told the good doctor here on more than one occasion, it's a capital mistake to theorize before one has all the evidence. But it does seem strange that the captain would allow one of his crew to carry a large pet on board when space is so important.
Perhaps that is a question best left to a student of the Russian mind.
We have yet to establish that the captain and his crew were as Russian as the schooner.
Excuse me, but has no one questioned the crew about the mystery of the dead man? Or the dog?
No, that would be quite impossible, Doctor. You see, with the exception of the corpse at the wheel, there was no one on board the ship.
Good Lord.
Tell me, Mr. Parker, who was first on board after the ship had beached?
The Coast Guard on duty.
Did he examine the dead man?
Yes, sir, and flew up his hands in terror as he did so.
Indeed. And why was that?
Mr. Holmes, I saw the dead man's face when I went on board. It was distorted, so grotesquely distorted that it was difficult to believe it was the face of a human being.
Distorted? How?
With horror. Naked, unrestrained horror. Such horror as no man has experienced since the beginning of time.
Yes. You have a poetic turn of phrase, Mr. Parker. I urge you to put it to constructive use. Describe the body.
A man, some years past middle age, black-bearded. His hands were lashed to the wheel, one over the other, in a manner of a seaman who wished to prevent himself being carried overboard in rough weather. The chafing of the cords had cut his wrists to the bone. But it was the object that he held in his hands that claimed my interest.
And what was that?
A rosary, sir, with the beads wound around both wrists at the wheel. It was a strange sort of thing to find in those circumstances, hence my interest. That is all I can remember. Save for the wounds.
Wounds?
2 puncture marks at the throat, perhaps an inch apart. Ragged at the edges, perhaps puckered. The authorities have asked us to withhold that information to avoid panicking the public that a wild animal is loose in Whitby.
I assume a physician was summoned.
Yes, sir. A surgeon, Mr. Caffin, was called in to examine the corpse. He declared the sailor to have been dead for at least 2 days. In the pocket of the man's jacket, he found a bottle with a number of pages of closely written script rolled up inside. I have since learned that they are an addendum to the ship's log, and so far the press have been refused access to it.
Excellent. You have a sharp eye, Mr. Parker. And what of the ship's cargo?
50 wooden boxes, measuring some 7 feet by 3, containing nothing but plain earth. I am ignorant as to their ownership or purpose.
And the dog? What happened to it after leaving the schooner?
No one knows. It has disappeared.
An appealing problem, Mr. Parker, most appealing.
Does that mean you will accept the assignment, Mr. Holmes?
Yes, I shall be delighted. You may inform your editor that Mr. Sherlock Holmes will look into the problem, and that he will inform the Daily Graph as soon as he has reached a solution.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I am most grateful.
A good day. Well, Watson, what do you make of it all?
Seems a somewhat dark and sinister business.
I agree wholeheartedly. There was something aboard that ship, something that no man could look upon without risking his life or reason. And it's up to us to uncover it.
What about the dog and the strange wounds upon the dead man's throat?
Those, my dear Watson, are the mysteries which you and I are going to clear up when we reach Whitby. Unless, of course, your practice cannot spare you for a few days.
Oh, yes, indeed it can. I will see to it that all my patients are referred to my neighbour, and that Mary will not see me for a while.
Then make haste, Watson, make haste. I wager that the adventure of the foreign schooner will make a welcome addition to your little collection of thrillers.
Within the hour, we were in a first-class coach and rattling over the rails and away to Whitby. Holmes would have none of my attempts to draw him into conversation about the case, so much of the journey was spent in silence. In response to a telegram from Mr. Parker, informing him of the time of our arrival, the journalist was waiting for us when we alighted at Whitby Station. With him was an elderly gentleman, who, much to my surprise, Holmes greeted warmly.
Good day, Mr. Caffin. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance.
You've noticed the bulge of the stethoscope in my pocket, Mr. Holmes. For a moment, I thought you'd done something remarkable.
Indeed.
Mr. Caffin has expressed an interest in this affair, Mr. Holmes. I thought perhaps his findings on the death of the seaman might prove useful.
Indeed. Any information he can supply would be most helpful.
It's an extremely puzzling case.
How so?
I can see no reason for it. Yet I would stake my reputation on the fact that the man died from a severe loss of blood.
And the puzzle?
Well, with the exception of 2 tiny punctures in his throat, which were far too small to be the reason of the loss, there were no wounds to be found in the body.
I see.
And another feature worries me. There was not a drop of blood to be found anywhere on the ship.
You have my apologies, Mr. Parker. Until now, I have been referring to your mystery as a little one. I shall not do so again. Have you any new developments to report?
Only that this morning a dog belonging to a local coal merchant was found dead near Tate Hill Pier, with its belly slashed open by a savage claw. I can only think that this discovery must have been a victim of our missing canine.
Interesting. Most interesting.
But you must be tired after your journey. After you've rested, I would be honoured to take you to the schooner.
I think I speak for Dr. Watson as well as myself when I say we should be most eager to look into your mystery before we rest, Mr. Parker.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Oh, I was hoping you'd say that. I have a four-wheeler waiting to take us to the pier.
Have you discovered the name of the schooner yet?
Oh, yes, sir. It's called the Demeter.
A sea fog had settled over everything by the time we reached the harbour. The rather choppy waters had turned a gunmetal grey, and the vessels anchored in the area were reduced to indistinct shadows. Near the base of the pier, the schooner Demeter, with her sails and rags, was perched on a narrow mound of sand. Instead of boarding the ship as I had expected, Holmes spun on his heels and trudged off across the beach, with head bent and hands clasped behind his back, studying the sand at his feet. When at last he returned to where the rest of us were standing, he wore a crestfallen expression, which quickly became accusing when he turned it towards Thomas Parker.
The cargo has been unloaded!
Why, yes. Some men came for it this morning with 5 wagons. I was not here at the time and was not able to question them. The papers were in order, so they were allowed to take away the 50 boxes.
It's pitiful! You engage me to solve a mystery, and then you make it impossible for me to do so by allowing others to tramp all over the clues and take away the one bit of evidence I need to solve the problem.
I'm sorry.
Come, Watson! Let us board the ship. Perhaps between the two of us, we'll be able to piece together whatever remains.
Of course, Holmes. Of course.
Now stay here while I inspect the deck.
Watson! Over here!
But where? I can't see you in this confounded fog.
By the hell, man!
We're in luck, Watson. The ignorant fools who allowed the priceless bits of evidence to be carted away had the foresight to cut the rope that bound that poor unfortunate man to the wheel, rather than attempt to untie the knots.
You've reached a conclusion, then?
Only that Parker was right in assuming that the captain had lashed himself to the wheel. There are indentations in the rope ends that could only have been made by the man's teeth as he pulled the knots tight. At least we know that for certain now.
And your examination of the deck?
It yielded nothing. The teak is too clean to show footprints. The rail is a different matter, however.
Ah, what have you found?
Blood, Watson. Blood. Our friend the doctor was in error when he said there was none of it to be found on board the ship. I have discovered 3 places where drops of it splattered onto the rails, where the bodies of the crew were cast overboard.
You are certain they were murdered, then?
Oh, my dear fellow. I was never in doubt of the fact. But we'll discuss these things in greater detail when we're alone at the hotel. Now, perhaps you would care to rejoin Mr. Catherine and Mr. Parker while I go below. I won't be a moment. You see, Watson, it was imperative to the murderer that every last one of those on board be killed. He could not afford to take the chance of one of them telling what had occurred during the voyage.
But who is he? And why did he kill them?
I'm afraid I must disappoint you. I have as yet no answer to your first question, and although I have a theory regarding the second, it's too tenuous for me to air at the moment. But I will say this. Our murderer is a man of tremendous strength. It's no easy task to throw the body of a full-grown man over a rail 3 feet high.
Well, sure, there's no feet to drag.
No one was dragged.
Holmes.
There were no heel marks on the deck, and the blood on the rails was not smeared. No, Watson. The murderer was capable of lifting at least 14 stone high over his head and hurling it over the side.
Good Lord. If what you say is true, then we're dealing with a brute.
Precisely. Come in.
Mr. Holmes,
Parker, my dear fellow, what has happened? You look quite done in. Watson, a glass of wine for the man.
Oh, yes, of course.
No. No, it's quite all right. It's merely that I am of an excitable temperament. Recent events have proved rather too much for me. I will be my normal self again in a moment.
Well, sit down. How may we be of service to you?
I fear that you will not be pleased by my answer. I am here to ask you to abandon your investigations.
Indeed. I was not aware that my methods were so unsatisfactory.
It's not that, sir. The mystery, it's been cleared up.
And may I ask how?
This is a translation from the log of the Demeter. All the answers seem to be contained in it.
I should prefer to hear your interpretation of its contents, Mr. Parker.
It seems obvious enough. The Demeter sailed from Varna on July 6th. Aboard were 5 mates, 2 hands, a cook, and a captain who appeared to be the man we found lashed to the wheel. 10 days later, one of his crew were reported missing. A search was launched, but to no avail. It was decided that he had fallen overboard during his watch. Within the week, another man was lost under the same circumstances. By the first week in August, only the captain and his first mate were left aboard ship. The captain himself was manning the wheel at midnight on August 3rd when the mate, screaming incoherently about something horrible in the hold, scrambled up on below and flew himself over the side. The captain stated in his August 3rd entry that he was convinced his mate, then a hopeless madman, was responsible for the sailor's death.
But what of this entry for the 4th? I dare not go below. I dare not leave the helm. So here all night I stayed, and in the dimness of the night I saw it, him, and later. For I shall battle this fiend or monster, for I shall tie my hands to the wheel when my strength begins to fail. And along with them I shall tie that which it, dare not touch. And then come good wind or foul, I shall save my soul and my honor as captain. Well, I must say, these are strange words from a man who has seen the perpetrator of these strange crimes take his own life.
Well, when that was written, the captain had been at the helm for nearly 24 hours without relief. I think you can put it down to the ravings of a man in the throes of complete exhaustion.
The captain's death. I'm very curious to hear your theory as to the severe loss of blood.
Mr. Gathin is a fine surgeon, but he is also elderly. I think perhaps he mistook an anemic condition for blood loss. The man died, I guess, from heart failure, brought on by that same exhaustion which caused his delusions.
My word, you have all the answers. Then surely you can explain the punctures in the man's throat.
And do not forget the dog.
Oh, quite right, Watson. By all means, do not let us forget the dog.
The dog, of course, belonged to one of the dead sailors. I am unable to explain the punctures unless they were shaving nicks.
You, sir, are a disgrace. A disgrace to the legions of honest men and women who have courted death 1,000 times over to make your profession the powerful organ of justice that it is today.
Why?
Take your transcript and leave. My colleague and I have no time for sniveling whelps who grovel before the voice of authority.
Yes, sir.
Well, there is one journalist who will think twice before he places himself in the middle again.
What was that all about?
He's covering up, Watson.
Why should he do that?
You saw his condition when he came in. Mr. Parker is a very frightened young man. Someone has decided to lay our little mystery to roost.
You do not seem surprised at this development.
I knew some influence was being brought to bear when I came across the sets of wagon ruts leading to and from the stranded schooner. Evidence that its cargo had been carried away. Paw prints of the infamous dog, evidence of the cargo had all been lost. I cannot conceive of that happening without the sanction of someone in authority. I owe you an apology, Watson.
Whatever for?
For embroiling you in a case that can never be solved. Because of the official ramparts that have doubtless already been flung in our path. Tomorrow we return to London and forget the whole affair.
I saw nothing of Holmes throughout the next few weeks. As for myself, I was too busy with my practice to leave my consulting rooms for more than 10 minutes at a stretch. The end of the holiday season had brought its usual quota of insect bites and summer colds. So I was taken completely by surprise when, shortly after I had retired on the evening of the 27th of September, my wife awakened me to tell me that Holmes was waiting for me downstairs.
I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour, Watson, but if Mrs. Watson has no objections, I should like to borrow you for a few days. Something has come up in which your services may prove of considerable value.
Well, I don't know if Mary...
Change will do you good, John. I shall see that Mr. Jackson takes over your practice.
Excellent. Pack a bag, Watson, for you shall be staying with me until this business is concluded.
I will see to your bag.
Thank you, my dear. Now, what's all this, Holmes?
You'll find a summary of the events of the past week on the front page of this issue of the Westminster Gazette. I think that one or two of the details may claim your interest.
The Hampstead Horror.
Read on.
Although there have been no fatalities as yet, the discovery on Hampstead Heath, the 4 preceding evenings, of small children, badly frightened and strangely weakened, but otherwise unharmed except for slight injuries, brought back memories of the shocking atrocities wrought in the East End by the fiend known as Jack the Ripper 2 years ago. The only information the constables have been able to glean from the young victims is that a bloofer lady, dressed in white, had asked them to come with her into the shadows. And the next thing they remembered was being alone in the shadows, till a policeman or early morning stroller came upon them. In all cases, the tots have shown a uniform lack of ability to explain either their weaknesses or the wounds found upon their throats. The wound seems such that it might have been inflicted by a rat or some equally small animal. And their presence suggests that the culprit called the Bloofer Lady may be a dangerous monomaniac, performing experiments on small children with animals. Oh, what a beastly business.
The beastly? Well, yes, I suppose you're right. But come, Watson, surely your professional altruism has not been so impaired as to affect your logic. What significance, for instance, do you attach to the children's weakness, or the presence of these singular wounds upon their person?
Well, weakness and dizziness are common reactions to a frightening episode. As for the wounds, it would be foolish to blame them on a chance meeting with a stray animal, as they've shown up on, well, not one, but 4 successive evenings. I believe that the journalist who reported these incidents is correct in thinking that some demented practitioner has been conducting experiments in which a carnivorous beast is set upon a helpless child. The presence of a woman in white would seem to bear this out.
Admirable, Watson. I'm pleased to know that the years you've spent observing and chronicling my methods have not been wasted.
Oh, then you agree with my conclusion?
No, you're totally wrong.
Oh.
Now, what possible motive could a scientist, demented or otherwise, have in subjecting stray children to the bite of some creature and then releasing them? Surely this person is aware that wounds will result. And yet the period that elapsed between the time these tots are reported missing and the time they are returned to their parents is hardly long enough to observe any further reactions. So your crazed practitioner goes out of the window.
Well then, I confess that I'm quite in the dark. Why are these children wounded, and what caused these wounds? And these are deep waters for me.
As deep, perhaps, as the waters that closed over the missing crew of the Demeter.
Now, Holmes, you don't think that these 2 cases are related?
The constable that discovered the latest of the child victims described the wounds on the boy's throat as a pair of punctures, roughly 1 inch apart and torn at the edges. Now, does this description strike a chord in your memory?
The wounds in the captain's neck.
Precisely. Now, as soon as your wife returns with your bag, we must be off.
Off where?
To Hampstead, of course, to explore the infamous Heath. No doubt, Watson, you're wondering what we are doing here in the middle of nowhere.
Where are we going, Holmes? Yes, I'm more confused than ever.
Patience, my dear fellow. I promise that before this night is over, you shall have all the answers you seek. For the moment, we are making for the cemetery, over there.
For what purpose?
To gain admittance to the white crypt at the center. Come. Here's where your lantern will prove useful, Watson. Cast a beam on the lock, and let us see if my talents as a burglar are... Hello. What's this?
The door's already open. What can this mean?
Draw your revolver, Watson. There's danger inside.
The power of the light compels. The power of the light compels you.
Who are these people,
The
Holmes?
power of the light compels
And why are they gathered around that open coffin?
I believe I know.
My God! The body inside! It's the woman in white!
No! We must do it now!
The man in the middle! He has a wooden stake in his hand! Is he... Good God!
Again!
My God, he's killing her, Holmes!
It is done.
Professor Van Helsing, I think.
What?
And the others would be Arthur Seward and Lord Godalming. This gentleman I do not know.
Allow me to present Quincy Morris, a friend of Lord Godalming. Sir, who are you, and how did you know my friends' names?
My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is my associate, Dr. John Watson. As to the rest, I shall be delighted to exchange information with you in a more convivial setting.
I accept your offer, Mr. Holmes. I have a moment at Berkeley. There you will tell me your tale, and I tell you ours. It is a tale not for the squeamish. It is a tale of Count Dracula. I judge by your friend's expression that he judges himself in the lay of a murderer.
Absolutely.
Has he not been told?
He has not been told for the simple reason that I myself did not know until recently.
Well, what exactly do you know, Mr. Holmes?
I know that the woman whose existence you ended so abruptly tonight was a vampire. I know that in life her name was Lucy Westenra, and that she was engaged to be married to young Lord Godalming. I know also that the man who condemned her to her undead state arrived in England, aboard the Russian schooner Demeter, which docked in the most mysterious circumstances in Whitby on August 8th. I'm counting on you, Professor Van Helsing, to fill in the details.
I flatter myself that not even your lightning quick mind could have arrived at the conclusion faster than did my own. Once this threatened woman's symptoms were described to me, the physical decline, the presence of 2 tiny wounds upon her throat, was there ever a more classic case of the dark fiends of the night at work than this? Without hesitation, I took the precautions which have been ingrained in me since childhood. Strands of Fraulein garlic I strung around Miss Lucy's bedroom. The silver crucifix I placed around her neck. But alas, these were wasted efforts. I had not taken into account the ignorance of Miss Lucy's mother. She removed the garlic to allow her daughter to breathe the night air. If only that were all that entered her room that night. The final decline had begun. On September the 20th, Miss Lucy expired. And on that night, the Bluffer lady was born.
Oh, what an affable twaddle. Holmes, this creature is seeking to escape a charge of murder by claiming he did nothing more than in the aid of the destruction of a phantom. But it's obvious flesh and blood. I have never seen a more flimsy attempt to escape one's guilt.
Sit down, Watson. Professor Van Helsing speaks the truth.
What?
Who is Count Dracula? As well you may ask me who is Lucifer, for the two have much in common. According to my friend Professor Artemis at the University of Budapest, Dracula was the proud descendant of Attilus, who led his horde against the bloodthirsty Turk over 4 centuries ago. Even then, before it is said he offered his immortal soul to the evil one in return for everlasting life, Dracula was spoken of as vampire, berserker. Still he is spoken of as such in the land which once he ruled. Jonathan Harker, in May of this year, journeyed to Castle Dracula in distant Transylvania to aid the Count in purchasing a suitable estate near London.
Where is this estate?
It is called Carfax. It stands upon a byroad at Purfleet. Mynheer Parker's stay in Transylvania was a circus of horrors from which he was able to escape only through terrible risk to his life. What took place after this estate was acquired by Dracula, I've been able to piece together from newspapers, from my own experience. The appearance in Whitby of the Russian schooner piloted by a dead man last month carrying a cargo of 50 boxes of earth tells me that Dracula has docked in England. He it was who condemned our poor Miss Lucy to her undead state, from which we were able to free her only this evening. As her avengers, our next step is to seek him out in his present lair and destroy him before he can contaminate another soul.
Oh, really?
I see, Doctor, that you are skeptical.
I most certainly am.
I once laughed, as you do, at the idea of vampires, corpses that prey upon the blood of the living. I laugh no more, for I have seen the evidence of their unholy existence. Now I know their strengths and weaknesses as well as I know my own. By day they are powerless. They rest in coffins upon or beneath the soil of their homeland. Until now, we who have studied the Nosferatu, the undead, believed of this necessity, bound the vampire to his native shores. But by taking with him an ample supply of earth from Transylvania, Dracula is free to haunt the 4 corners of the globe with impunity, so long as he remains undetected. We know of his appetite. The death of the 4 seamen on the month-long voyage from Varnau to Whitby told us this. We know from the appearance of what the observers called an immense dog on board ship that Dracula can change his shape at will. He can at least, in his immediate vicinity, command the elements. Witness the sudden gale which struck Whitby on the night of the Demeter's arrival. Miss Lucy's rebirth is evidence enough that his victims become themselves vampire. As if all these things are not enough, he has the strength in him of 24 men, who but a brute could have succeeded in hurling overboard the limp corpses of his victims at sea. So now you see, gentlemen, the magnitude of the task that we have set for ourselves.
Has he no weaknesses? Have you no weapons which to combat this fiend?
No, weapons we have aplenty. Wolfsbane is one, garlic another, but most feared is the Holy Cross and all that goes with it. By day and by night we may operate, while during the hours of sunlight Dracula must rest. And to bring to an end his unclean existence, we have the wooden shaft. By such means may the vampire be rooted out.
Bravo, Professor Van Helsing. You have laid out a preliminary plan of action, much as I would have done myself. The information which you have provided is of great value. In return, my colleague and I will be happy to lend our limited powers to the task that you have so eloquently described.
I am grateful, Mr. Holmes, but that will not be necessary.
I beg your pardon.
Please, do not take offense. It is not that we would not welcome the application of your remarkable powers to this labor, but rather that we would prefer to avoid notoriety. Even in my country, we are familiar with the good doctor's accounts of your more interesting cases, and we are anxious not to have publicity that may panic all of Britain.
I assure you, sir, that Dr. Watson and myself will be most discreet.
I am sorry. I must ask you to leave so that I may confer with my companions.
Why? If you do not desire our assistance, have you told us so much about Dracula? Why didn't you simply refuse to take us into your confidence?
Because if I had not, would you have abandoned your investigation?
Certainly not.
There, you see.
You are committing a grave error, Professor Van Helsing. I urge you to reconsider.
The matter is closed. If either of you should attempt to interfere, I shall be forced to take drastic measures.
Good day. Come, Watson.
Good day, sir. Well, I suppose that's that.
On the contrary, that is definitely not what it is.
Whatever do you mean? How can we go any further in this business without Van Helsing's aid?
You're no longer skeptical.
Oh, I'm always skeptical. But I admit, I'm not so sure of my ground as I was.
Good. Then you will journey with me tomorrow night to Purfleet, where we will pay a call on the vampire in his lair.
It was not quite dark the next evening when we stood before the entrance to the Carfax estate. Even though Van Helsing had not included bullets in the weapons he considered effective against our singular foe, Holmes had insisted we each carry a revolver. Holmes succeeded with unlocking the door with the second key he tried, and with an effort, for the door was thick and heavy, we pushed it open.
That's done it, I'm afraid. Step carefully, Watson. He knows we're here now.
Oh, what on earth's that foul smell?
Quiet! We'll explore down that flight of steps. As I thought, the chapel.
Oh, that stench, it comes from here.
Raise your lantern. You see, Watson.
Boxes. Coffin-shaped boxes. And look, filled with earth.
Wait. There are only 29. We must conclude that...
Shh! What is it?
There, behind you.
What? There! There was someone in the doorway. For a brief second, I'd swear it.
Quick! After him! Hold! Back, Watson!
What?
Back! Rats! Thousands of rats! Clear a passage and run for the love of God, man! Run! Come, Watson. Let's get away from this place as quickly as we can.
Oh, ghastly beasts.
Ghastly indeed. And sent for a purpose. That macabre demonstration was designed to frighten us off, with great success. Even so, we've won a victory.
In what way? We've done nothing.
On the contrary, we've determined that the Count has other hiding places. Otherwise, we would have found all 50 boxes of earth in the chapel.
Well, how does that help us?
Quick! Into the trees, here!
Van Helsing.
I dare say that the Professor and his companions are in for a reception much like the one given to us. Wait until they're inside, and then we shall make our way home to Baker Street and a large whiskey apiece. You see, Watson, it's now that the true detective work begins. We know that Dracula has other lairs, and it's up to us to find them. Once we have accomplished this, it should be a simple matter to dispose of his precious Transylvanian soil, thus narrowing his opportunities of exploiting this country of ours.
And if we should find the fiend himself?
Then we must destroy him before he can spread his vampire pestilence throughout the empire. We have no other choice.
That's odd. I heard no footsteps on the stairs.
Come in.
Good God!
Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Welcome, Count Dracula.
He was dressed entirely in black. His eyes glowed like smoldering embers. But it was his teeth, those dagger-sharp canine teeth peering out between bright red lips that held my attention. They were the fangs of a predator.
Yes, I am Dracula, but how?
That mirror on the wall, it reflects only an open door.
You are indeed observant, and I am honored to make your acquaintance. Even in the country of my birth, we have been fortunate enough to read of your marvelous exploits against the English criminal.
You flatter me, Count. Your reputation precedes you as well. Perhaps you would care to join my colleague and myself in some whiskey. Watson, a glass...
Thank you, but I do not drink alcoholic beverages. The hours of the night are few, and I have much to do before morning. I will state my business, and then you will be rid of me.
Would that were true, Count Dracula.
You are an outspoken man, Mr. Holmes. In my country, that is a dangerous trait. I advise you to guard your tongue in my presence.
My dear Count, we are both too old to waste time upon these pleasantries. How may I be of service to you?
Earlier this evening, you paid a visit to my home. I would like to know why.
Well, I think we both know the answer to that question.
So we do. When I learned that it was you that invaded my Purfleet residence, I realized my activities in England had attracted your professional interest, an interest which I can hardly afford at this stage of my operations. I am here to ask you to abandon your investigations before they do you real harm.
If that's your purpose, then I'm afraid you have come here for nothing.
I am a wealthy man, Mr. Holmes. I promise that you will not regret having granted me this one favor. I urge you to consider what I ask. You think you have faced all the terrors the world has to offer, but Mr. Holmes, you have barely scratched the surface. Jonathan Harker was driven mad by the myriad of forces that are mine to command. He was fortunate. Even as we stand here, those forces are gathering, responding to my unspoken instructions with one subject in mind: to destroy all obstacles that stand in my path. From icy graves they arise, from gallows and tombs, for all that die are my angels. They are the army of the dead. How can one mortal expect to triumph over this, such an enemy?
Your tales are wasted on me, Count Dracula. I'm no more frightened of them than I was by your rats.
The rats were a warning. I assure you that when I decide to act in earnest, you will not escape.
I've heard enough. You may show our visitor to the door, Watson.
That will not be necessary. There are far worse things than death, Mr. Holmes. Persist, and I promise you will find out what I mean.
Did you notice the cold, Watson?
Yes.
I felt the same thing. The moment we entered Carfax, the miasma that surrounds Count Dracula. There. It grows warmer now he has left. A most informative confrontation. What do you suppose he thought to accomplish by coming here?
I should think that's obvious. He ought to stop you from interfering with his plan. When bribery failed, he resorted to threats.
No, Watson. Dracula had no intention of inducing me to leave him alone. That was merely his excuse. To come here and observe his enemy in his natural habitat. Now I must dispatch some telegrams to Whitby. Within a few hours, I shall be able to find where the remainder of the 50 boxes were sent. Where they are, Dracula cannot be far away.
In spite of the cavalier fashion in which my friend had dismissed the fiend's visit, it was obvious the episode had unnerved him. Twice, I awakened during the night to hear the melancholy strain of Holmes's violin, a sure sign that he was too preoccupied with the problem at hand to sleep. It was during these periods that I feared most for my friend's health. Although I had cured him of the terrible addiction that had once threatened to destroy that brilliant brain, I knew the temptation was still there. The next morning, his spirits seemed restored, and this improved still further upon the arrival of a series of telegrams.
Success, Watson! I have learned of all of Dracula's hiding places in London.
I'm delighted to hear it.
On August the 10th, 50 boxes of earth were put on the train for London and upon arrival were placed in 4 separate locations, according to instructions. Among these locations were Carfax Estate.
Well, I assume we visit each of the places mentioned.
On the contrary, we will do nothing.
Nothing.
The Count is growing nervous. Why else would he have visited me here yesterday evening and tried to buy me off? It was an act of desperation, and you and I both know that desperate men make mistakes. That is what I meant when I suggested we do nothing. I should have made clear the fact that we will be waiting.
Waiting? For what?
Count Dracula to make his first mistake. I assure you, Watson, it will be his last as well.
I have never known my friend, Sherlock Holmes, to be more reclusive or difficult to talk to than he was during the opening days of October 1890. As hour followed hour, with no news that would give us a clue to the progress of Count Dracula's activities, the detective withdrew into a shell of secrecy and quiet that not even I could hope to crack. It was not until 4 o'clock on the afternoon of the 3rd, when a messenger appeared at our door with a note addressed to him, that Holmes so far unbent as to speak to me words of a more than single syllable.
I think, Watson, that Dracula is preparing to leave.
Leave? For where?
I cannot say. Transylvania, perhaps.
It would seem a wise choice under the circumstances.
And yet, it's not like the Count to give up so easily. He may alter his plans, but it's doubtful that he would reverse them, simply because they're known to his enemies. Well, Watson, I think that whatever Dracula's next step may be, it would not be surrender.
Well, as long as we're on the subject of the next step, how do you propose to find him?
Considering Dracula's preference for long-abandoned buildings, we should have little difficulty in locating a suitable place within a half-mile radius. There's a building nearby, which once sheltered a slaughterhouse, but which has been empty for some time. That would indeed make a suitable hiding place for such a murderer. Come, Watson. It's getting dark. There's no time to waste. Look, Watson. The entrance to the slaughterhouse. It's open. He's here. I'm certain. Quiet now.
Those men. Yes. It's one of those boxes from the ship. They're loading it onto that wagon. The Count is preparing for his departure. Any sign of him?
No. Wait.
It is all ready. Go on.
I'm ready, Holmes.
Who is over there?
Good evening, Count Dracula.
You idiot. You have come all this way to die.
Vain words, Count. Instruct your servants to unload the box.
No!
Look out, Watson. He'll run you down.
What? No!
Watson! Watson, are you all right?
He's escaped, Holmes.
Oh, I would rather have him escape 100 times than have you harmed once, dear friend. But cease worrying. We'll find him soon enough.
Indeed. And how do you propose to do that?
Do you recall the case of Jonathan Small and his diminutive partner and how he tracked them through London's busy streets?
Toby?
A dog with a nose for criminals. He should have little trouble following the path of so clumsy a mode of transportation as a wagon.
How do you expect Toby to differentiate the tracks left by the wagon and those of the thousands of other vehicles which pass along the streets?
Are you telling me that any self-respecting dog would find it difficult to track down a wagon whose wheels have rode over ground rich in blood and entrails?
Oh, Holmes, you're a genius.
Do you feel up to collecting Toby from his owner and bringing him here?
Ready and willing, Holmes. We must have made quite a sight for the early evening strollers in Whitechapel. One man being pulled along by a whooping mongrel, while another rushed along in their wake, puffing and holding onto his hat with one hand. I grew uneasy as we emerged from the twisting dark alleys of the East End and entered more familiar surroundings. How can I describe the cold sensation that began to gnaw at my heart when the trail geared towards my own neighborhood? I told myself that my fears were groundless, that it was most likely nearby Paddington Station to where the fiend was heading, there to book passage elsewhere. We'd gone scarcely another 100 yards when my worst apprehensions were realized. With a mighty lunge, the dog tore off the leash from my friend's grip and bounded up the stairs of my own building to where the front door stood halfway open. He disappeared inside, his triumphant bark ceasing suddenly inside the entrance. We followed him in and came across the dog crouched down on the floor, his head down and his tail tucked between his legs. At first, I could see no reason for this curious behavior, but then I became aware of the strange and terrible odor that filled the hall. It was the unearthly chill that Count Dracula took with him from the grave. He's been here, Holmes.
Oh, sir, Doctor, is it you? Oh, it's Mrs. Barton, sir, from next door.
Where is my wife, Mrs. Barton? What's happened to her?
Gently, Watson, gently. There, Mrs. Barton. There's nothing to be afraid of. Now tell us what happened.
I was visiting Mrs. Watson, sir. She was feeling poorly. I was giving her tea. And the door burst open, and in he came. Tall he was, dressed in black, with his eyes blazing.
Go on.
Mrs. Watson was in her robe and nightgown. She demands to know who he is and what he's doing here. You are Mary Watson, he says. I am, says she. My time is short now. There's a long journey ahead of me, he says. Come. He gathered her up in his arms and carried her kicking and screaming to the door. And then he stops and looks back at me. He had the devil's own eyes. They burned like all the fires of hell. I thought that was it for me. Mrs. Watson had fainted. He held her like a rag doll. And then he said, inform the doctor that no harm will befall his wife if he and his friend do not follow. And then he ups and vanishes into the dark at the top of the stairs.
Oh, God.
I was scared stiff he's come back for me. So I ran and hid myself in the closet. When I heard the door opening, I was sure he'd come back for me. And then I heard your voice, Dr. Watson.
Now, one more question, Mrs. Barton. Did he say anything about where he was going?
Not really. I thought I heard the wheels of the wagon, a four-wheeler, going off in the direction of King's Cross.
I see. Thank you, Mrs. Barton. You've been most helpful. You'd better go home now. You'll be quite safe.
He has her. The fiend has my wife.
It's my belief that the Count is a man of his word. I have little doubt he will release Mrs. Watson unharmed if we do not follow.
And then what? Whose wife will be his next victim? We cannot afford to let this vile thing remain in the face of the earth, Holmes, no matter what the cost.
Even at the risk of your wife's soul?
Even so.
Good fellow. How can I help take you for granted when your character is so consistently strong? We will return Toby to his owner and then be off to King's Cross Station. This tale will have a happy ending yet.
The third clerk we talked to at King's Cross remembered having sold a ticket to Whitby to a tall, dark man, but expressed no recollection of a woman answering to Mary's description in his company. He did recall, however, that the passenger had an oblong box with him, which was loaded into the guard's van, and that it took 3 men to lift it. He told us the next train to Whitby was not until 6 o'clock the following morning.
Too late. It's as I thought. He has us shut up in a box.
What now? It's 10 o'clock at night. The villain has a head start on us, and we have no way of following.
On the contrary, Watson, I know of a certain coachman not far from here who can match the fastest train on the Isle. With his help, we may be in Whitby in time to apprehend Dracula before he leaves the country.
I shall not attempt to describe the harrowing journey we took from between London and Whitby, other than to say it aged me considerably. All that night and throughout the next day, we travelled, stopping only 3 times to change horses. But we were hampered by thick fog. And when we finally arrived at midnight on October the 4th, we knew it had been to no avail. The train had arrived before us.
Do not be depressed, Watson. I think I know where our quarry went from here. Driver, to the shipping offices at the docks. Someone there should remember a man of Dracula's description booking passage for himself in a large box of earth.
We were in luck. The clerk at the first office we went into remembered serving a man of Dracula's description earlier that evening. He had booked passage for himself and an oblong box in the Tsarina Katerine, a ship sailing for Warnow in the Black Sea, late the following night. To meet us port of departure. We lost no time in making for the dockside, and soon come across one of the men who had helped Dracula, a surly fellow.
Yep, I remember him. He wanted a box loaded onto the cutter and paid well he did. But first, he wanted the contents transferred to an empty crate that was lying on the dock.
What?
And a box filled with sand from the beach. By the time I got back from the beach, the crate was gone. When the box was filled, he told me to load it into the cabin.
So, the box on the Katerine is a decoy.
What sort of creature are you to help another in the abduction of an innocent woman for a mere piece of gold?
What kind of bilge is that? We're no woman with him. Abducted, or otherwise.
Where is this crate you mentioned?
Search me. I told you it was gone when I got back with the sand.
What ships have left this harbour within the last hour?
2, I think. I heard a steamer blowing its whistle half an hour ago. And I helped an American clipper cast off a bit before that. I suppose they'd been overdue. They wouldn't have let them go until the fog lifted.
What do you know of these vessels?
Steamer would have been the King Henry, bound for Australia. The other's the Baltimore, trader, out of Boston.
Where is my wife?
The mesmeric powers of the vampire are nearly without limit, as you know only too well, Watson. It's likely that Dracula commanded her to remain out of sight until he had concluded his business.
Where can we hire a motor launch?
Who are you, and what are you on about? We have a good mind to call for a Coast Guard and have you both arrested. Who is this bloke you're after? What is it to do with you?
I will explain. My name is Sherlock Holmes, and my companion here is...
You're Sherlock Holmes.
That is correct.
I've been waiting a long time to meet you, Mr. Holmes. My name is Ned Bridger.
Well, surely you remember my brother, Morgan, skipper of the Alicia, when it sailed into that patch of fog in the channel 10 years ago.
Your gratitude is misplaced, I fear. The disappearance of the Alicia is one problem that I was never able to solve.
But you proved from my brother's record that whatever happened to that ship couldn't have been due to any error in his part, as the authorities said. For that, I'll always be indebted to you, Mr. Holmes.
You're too kind. At present, however, we are in need of a boat.
Well, I know of a steam launch moored near here. The owner would never be the wiser if we borrowed it.
Excellent. Now, if you would kindly release your grip on my hand and lead us to the vessel in question, we can explain the reason for our being here and the villain we are after. Make haste, my dear fellow. The Baltimore has too much of a head start upon us already.
Follow me!
Why not the King Henry, Holmes?
The distance to Australia is too great. Considering Dracula's appetite, he would run out of crew members long before he reached the port. No, Watson, he's on his way to the conquest of the United States of America. And the arrangement with the Tsarina Katerine was merely an elaborate device to throw us off the track.
We drew a sketchy account for Ned Bridger of our hunt for Count Dracula, leaving out the incredible fact of his vampire existence and concentrating on his role as a murderer. By the end of it, that worthy seaman was willing to do all he could to help us. The diminutive steamer proved to have ample fuel aboard, and Ned Bridger succeeded in getting the engine into operation. At Holmes' insistence, I took control of the tiller while he stood in the bow. We eased out into the gloom of the harbour. The fog, which had parted sluggishly to allow us entrance, soon gathered around us, and we seemed to be floating through the bitter night. I was reminded of Van Helsing's claim that the vampire was capable of controlling the weather within his immediate vicinity. If this was so, then we were closer to our quarry than I dared hoped.
Starboard a bit of that rudder duck! Starboard it is!
If he hopes to reach the open sea, he's got to reach that reef first.
Holmes, there it is! The port bow!
Put a light on them. Full speed, Bridger. Overtake her.
It's getting away!
He's spotted us. Blasted. The captain and crew must be under his control. More speed, Bridger. Throw on more fuel. More speed, I say!
All right! Let's speak to hell! Good heavens!
This is Dracula's work. He's using the weather to elude us.
The ship's gonna blow!
Can you swim to the shore from here? Then let me have the throttle and jump overboard. Watson and I will take it from here.
It's my responsibility. I'll not turn this over to another.
Don't be a fool, Bridger. You've nothing to gain by these heroics.
Sorry, Mr. Holmes. I can't hear you. Holmes, look!
He's heading straight for the shore.
Straight for the reef as well.
Dracula must be unaware of his existence.
Holmes, look! They're taking the Baltimore. Their men leap them to the sea.
Yes, no doubt they prefer the ocean to the reef.
It's gonna blow!
Into the water, Watson!
The water was cold as death. But that was hardly my first concern. There was a tremendous explosion, and the harbour was thrown into blazing brightness. Debris of the steam launch smashed down all around me. My first thought was of Holmes. Had he too succeeded in quitting the craft before the boiler burst?
Holmes! Holmes!
There was no reply. Just the thunder and pouring rain. This, then, was how it ended. All the deduction, all the hours spent poring over clues and following trails left by criminals left over England and the continent. All the telegrams from the powerful and destitute, requesting aid in solving mysteries of the most baffling nature. All had come to an icy grave in a remote English harbour. It was with lead in my heart that I began swimming towards the shore. And then I saw it. The Baltimore, perched not 20 feet away from me. There was a great gaping hole in the bow where it had struck the reef. But other than that, the vessel appeared intact. My relief at spotting the evidence that my wife may have not have perished was tempered by a sobering thought. Where was Dracula? A sudden flash of lightning, and I saw the fiend standing on the deck, holding limp the form of my beloved Mary. Whether she was alive or dead was something I could not tell at this distance. For a long moment, we were motionless, glaring at each other across the score of feet that separated us. Then Dracula turned and disappeared into the captain's cabin. That I had been challenged to follow him was a certainty. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my temperature soaked my condition. Sherlock Holmes was dead, and I was alone against Count Dracula. I struck out towards the beached vessel, searching for the best way to board her, without being observed by the vampire, and had waded stealthily into the shadows of the clipper's far side, when suddenly a hand was clapped firmly over my mouth.
The slightest sound would prove disastrous to our plans.
Holmes! Oh, what miracle is this? How is it that you survived that terrible explosion?
Surviving that terrible explosion was not as difficult as you might think, for the simple reason I was not there when it occurred. I jumped.
Wonderful. But where's Bridger? Is he with you?
No, Watson. He's not. I jumped with Bridger's assurance that he would be right behind me. Whether he was telling the truth or not is a mute point. The boiler blew just as I hit the water. He did not have time to jump.
He was a brave man.
And it's up to us to see that he did not die in vain. You saw Dracula a few minutes ago.
Yes, he has Mary with him.
Under the Count's manipulation, she appears to have exchanged the role of hostage for another as bait. I am dead, or so he thinks. And he has so far underestimated your intelligence as to believe he can lure you into a trap. We will, of course, not disappoint him.
What do you mean?
I will give you 5 minutes. Enter the hold through the aperture in the bow. Dracula will not be expecting that. It's too obvious. Wait until you hear 2 gunshots outside. Ascend to the deck and make your way to the captain's cabin, where you will find your wife waiting for you. When you have her, shout it out for all the world to hear, then make for the shore as fast as possible. I don't have to remind you that Mrs. Watson's life, as well as your own, depend upon the speed you will be making.
I climbed through the hole in the clipper's bow and crept along the tilted deck towards the ladder that led into the open, there to await Holmes's signal. Soon as I heard the shots, I lost no time in clambering up the ladder. My alacrity nearly cost me my life. No sooner had I reached the top deck than I felt a sudden chill. Immediately, I dived into the nearest shadow. Between the captain's cabin and the starboard railing, I saw a black cloaked figure hastening past within touching distance of my hand. I ducked in through the doorway of the cabin as soon as Dracula's back was towards me and peered anxiously through the gloom. There was Mary. She looked very frail indeed. Her blue eyes were wide, not with terror as I expected them to be, but with unseeing stupor. I recognized the signs of hypnosis. My first act was to examine her throat for punctures. There were none. Thanking God for delivering her from that horror, I gathered her into my arms, carried her to the deck. Dracula was speaking as I got to the door.
So, you still live!
Do you think I would go to my grave and leave you here to prey on innocence?
Where is your companion?
I have a home!
Run, Watson, run!
He must surely die as you must do. Do you think you can defy me, Sherlock Holmes? I have been a warrior hundreds of years before you were born.
Run, Watson! If you value your life, run!
Well, Dr. Watson, look into my eyes. My eyes. You are unable to move, Dr. Watson. Unable to speak. You are mine.
Beware the sun, Count Dracula. It will sap your strength as surely did the seers of Samson's Delilah. Witness its purifying rays. Soon they will reach the ship and your power will cease to be. That is when we shall destroy you. Are you all right, Watson?
Yes, I think so.
And your wife? Has he harmed her?
He's not had that chance, thanks to you. But she's in a trance and suffering from exposure.
Then we'll get her to a hospital as quickly as possible.
But what about Count Dracula? Was that great wolf that leapt to shore really him?
It was.
You're not letting him get away.
No, Watson. The Serena Catherine does not sail until 8 o'clock this evening. In the meantime, let us attend to your wife.
We carried her still, fragile form along the reef to the shore and thence to the local hospital. All day we waited outside her room as she hovered precariously between life and death. It seemed an eternity. Towards evening, tired out by the previous night's exertions, I was dozing on the bench in the hospital corridor when Holmes nudged me to consciousness.
Watson, I'm afraid I shall have to leave you for a while.
Are you not going to wait for word on Mary's condition?
The Serena Catherine sails at 8. It's now considerably after 7. I have less than 45 minutes to return to the docks and settle the vampire's fate for good. I pray that Mrs. Watson will be out of danger by the time I return.
I'm going with you.
No! You will be worse than useless with your wife in her present condition. Besides, what will she think when she awakes and you are not here? No, Watson, you owe it to yourself to remain here. I will see you later.
Nurse, how's my wife?
She's resting. She's not out of danger yet, but the worst is over.
Oh, thank God. May I see her?
Very well, but only for a few minutes.
Thank you. Mary.
It was awful. I thought I was going to die.
Oh, my dear.
You look as if you could use a bed yourself, Dr. Watson.
Dracula.
Do not fear. I have not come to do mischief.
Then why are you here? And where is Holmes?
Your friend, I suspect, is in the process of discovering that I am not on board the Tsarina Catherine. He will no doubt quickly piece together my movements since leaving and must soon be on his way here. My time grows short. My business will not take more than a moment.
What is your business?
Curiosity, Dr. Watson.
Curiosity.
I can understand Professor Van Helsing's motives in wishing to destroy me. To Sherlock Holmes, I am a challenge, and I have learned from your accounts of his adventures that he cannot survive without such challenges. It is you, Doctor, that I cannot comprehend. I am at a loss to explain your desire to pursue this dangerous path. I speak not of your wife's abduction, although why should you jeopardize her safety by continuing your pursuit? From the beginning, you have shown an ungovernable enthusiasm for the chase. Why? What spell has Sherlock Holmes placed on you to make you accomplice in this mad scheme? I have risked everything by coming here, and I must have an answer before I return to my homeland.
Sherlock Holmes is my friend.
That is your answer.
It is the only one I have.
I must go. Farewell, Doctor.
What?
Where is he?
He dived out of the window, Holmes. It suddenly became a great bat. He's on his way back to the Tsarina Catherine, no doubt.
Your wife, Watson, has he harmed her?
No, he didn't touch her.
What does he want?
He wanted to know why I should wish to aid you in your pursuit of him.
Oh, and did he receive an answer?
Yes.
Thank you, Watson.
What about Dracula? Are we going after him?
No. The ship will have sailed by the time we reach the docks. The crew were making final preparations when I left. He will not touch ground again until he reaches Varnau.
Oh, what's to stop us getting to Varnau, resuming our pursuit?
I think, Watson, we shall leave that task for Van Helsing and his friends. Our part in the drama ends here.
It's not like you to quit a case before it is finished, Holmes.
But it is finished. We have accomplished what we set out to do.
But what is that? If Van Helsing is unable to trace Dracula back to his homeland, in a year's time the fiend may try again.
Do not underestimate the Professor. He is a relentless man. He and his companions will follow Dracula night and day, and they will not give up until they have sent the Sanguinary Count to the eternal rest that he has been waiting for over 400 years. Our reward is the knowledge that we put him on the defensive and rescued England from the vampire's clutches. I think that is enough, don't you?
It was November, just over a month since we had driven the nightmare from our shores. I was sitting at my desk, my afternoon's work done, or so I thought.
Someone to see you, my dear.
Working late, Watson?
Holmes!
I'll leave you two men together.
My dear Holmes, will you have a drink?
Oh, thank you. No, Watson. I have a hansom waiting outside. I merely stopped by to show you this telegram.
All is well, he is dead. For services uninvited, gratitude. VH, Varnau. VH?
Van Helsing.
Ah.
It appears that Dracula's threat is ended. Reluctant though the Professor's thanks seem, they are the mark of a proud man, and I shall be glad to add this telegram to my collection of memorabilia.
I did not know that he was aware of our continued involvement in the affair.
I told you before not to underestimate him. Well, I must go. I have a small matter awaiting my urgent attention.
Oh, could I...
Oh, no, my dear fellow. I wouldn't dream of taking you away from your practice so soon after the last time. Besides, the affair may prove too dangerous, and your wife may...
Oh, Mary will understand.
No, not when she is informed of whom it is that has crossed my path yet again.
Who?
Can you not guess? One as evil and cunning in every respect as the fiend whose life we now know to be over.
Not.
Yes, Watson. Professor Moriarty is up to his old tricks again.
Oh, no. Do not attempt to dissuade me, Holmes. It would be useless. I'm coming with you. Mary!